Hello, I'm Anthony. Doing a bit of a deep dive on the blues at the moment. And what I want to talk about today is how to mix major and minor blues scales when we're soloing over the top of a minor blues structure. Now today I'm going to be using this program here, Guitar Tutor, a lot to demonstrate what I'm talking about. If you want to get yourself a copy of this program, I make it available to my patrons and YouTube members. If you want to check out the Patreon link in the description below, or click the join button to become a YouTube member. So super quick recap. We've got 3 dominant 7th chords underneath. This is a totally standard 12-bar traditional blues. I'm not getting into jazz blues territory or any of the many variants of the thing. This is pure 1-4-5 blues. So I'm going to be playing E7s, A7s and B7s all over the place. In fact, later on in the video, I'll do a little bit of a cutaway where I play some of this stuff. And you can see in Cubase, I've got set up a really simple 12-bar blues that I played in, and it's all E's, A's, and B's. And so the question I asked myself was, what notes can I use to solo over the top of that? One of the things about the blues is that the answer to that is almost infinitely variable. And if you go on any forum and say, what notes can I play in the blues, you'll get variants all the way up to and including all 12 notes. We're sticking to discussion of the chromatic scale here, it's the only thing I understand. And so you will get people saying you can legitimately play all 12 notes, and they're kind of right. The problem is that's no use. If you're just setting out like I am, but I've never really explored the blues before, it's a subject that I'm really quite ignorant of. I want a bit more help than that. That's not much use to me. So we start with the basic structure. Here's the minor blues scale, which, as you'll see, is completely different from the chords underneath it. This is one of the first things you have to accept. You can't harmonize the blues. It doesn't follow standard harmonic structure in terms of having typically a diatonic scale, a 7-note scale, major or minor or Dorian or whatever you've got, and then you build chords from that scale. No, that's not how it works. The whole point of the blues is that you've got major and minor variants of notes, both of which can be played. So you can play flat 5s together with perfect 5s. You can play flat 3s together with major 3s. All of this stuff works, and it's a really interesting conversation going beyond the context of this video as to why you're allowed to play those 2 notes together. And I'm using, if I ever say a word like allowed, just put it in virtual air quotes, because you can fundamentally do whatever you want. But if I'm learning this stuff and I want to play over the top of it, I want a little bit more structure than that. So here's how I'm going to approach it. I want to be able to solo using both the minor blues scale and the major blues scale, which is another thing that I know about. You know, people will tell you that there is a major blues scale out there. It's not talked about nearly as much as the minor blues scale, but it is there. It does exist. So I want to be able to play either of those scales because they both sound great and they both sound fabulous over this E7, A7, B7 chord structure underneath. I'm going to start with the minor blues first. And I've written down this little chart over here. This is going to be a summary of everything that we talk about today. I'm just going to kind of layer one concept on top of another. We've got the notes of our chords. And what I'm going to say is, if you're playing one of those chords, you can play any of the notes. So for a moment, I'm going to put aside the dissonance aspect of the blues, that we deliberately play dissonant notes. Let's just concentrate on the chords themselves, because I know that I can play any of these 4 notes if I'm pedaling over an E7, and the notes themselves will fundamentally sound good. Let's worry about sticking the blues aspect of things back on later. Now let's also assume, just for the purpose of today's discussion, that at any time it's perfectly legitimate or reasonable to play either the minor blues scale or the major blues scale. Let's not mix the 2 together, it just makes life too complicated. I'm trying to keep things simple. And so I've also written out the major blues and the minor blues scales in this chart below, and we immediately hit a problem because neither of these scales contain all 4 notes of the chord that's being played over the top of it. So this is where we take our first leap of faith. What I basically said to myself was, well, okay, the major blues scale might not contain all of those notes, but the Mixolydian scale does. Now this is a mode of the major scale, totally reasonable, legitimate scale, and you'll see the Mixolydian mode being discussed a lot online in the blues. It's something that's very commonly used to solo over the top because it works so well. So let's extend that concept and say, okay, instead of playing just the major blues scale, let's treat it as if it's a Mixolydian scale. You can see the commonality between Mixolydian and major blues. It contains all of the notes of the major blues except this G. It's the only note that's missing. What the Mixolydian scale does give you is perfect synchronicity with the E7 chord you're trying to play over the top. So your only awkwardness is that you don't have a flat 3. Well, how about if we dial up the Mixolydian scale and we add a flat 3? So I'm going to put that in my bank of scales to play with. I'm going to say that's scale number 1. And if I'm ever playing an E7 chord underneath, I'm going to try this scale and see what it sounds like. Then I'm going to do exactly the same thing with the next chord. Here I'm playing an A7. So when I move up to the 4 of the blues pattern, I'm playing an A dominant 7, and that contains E, G, A, C sharp. When I look at this A7 in the context of E, don't forget the entire piece of music is in E. When I look at the notes of this chord, I see the E and the G, and I see a minor third interval there. If I can find a scale, fundamentally the scale wants to be a minor scale because the minor third of the scale is in the chord. So let's try and find a minor scale that fits over the top of those 4 notes. Well, once again, neither the minor blues or the major blues in their native form do. The minor blues is missing the C sharp or D flat, and the major blues is missing the A. But I've already decided I want to play a minor scale. So I'll actually show you the internal workings of what I'm doing under the hood. What I'm doing is I'm basically going into this function called key finder. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to demand that E, G, A and C sharp be in the scale that I'm trying to find. E, G, A and C sharp. And I'm also specifying that it must be in the key of E. And so this gives me a list of scales that I can choose from. Now lots of these are pretty complex and we're not going to go there, but right at the top of the list, sticking out like a sore thumb, is Dorian, one of the modes of the major scale. So we have a winner. I'm going to plug in E Dorian, and at that point I could call it done. The Dorian scale contains all 4 notes of A7, perfect match. However, you remember we're trying to play the blues, and the blues has a flat 5. The blue note in the blue scale is the flat 5. So if I'm playing a minor scale over the top of it, I'm going to pull myself fully back into the minor blues scale. Here are the 6 notes of the minor blues scale. I'm going to check them all off against Dorian, and any notes that are missing, in other words the flat 5, I'm going to add in. And so when I'm playing the A7 chord, I'm going to use this scale. Fabulous. Moving on. What are we going to do when we're playing a B7 chord? Well, those are the 4 notes. And so the first thing we do is check against the 2 scales to see if either of them match. Neither of them do. The 5 chord, the dominant 5 chord, is the one that stresses you the most. If you're trying to tie this stuff to any kind of theory at all, this B7 chord is an absolute nightmare because it's nowhere near either the minor blues scale or the major blues scale. That's not to say it sounds bad. Please don't think that I'm saying there's anything wrong with the blues. It's absolutely glorious. But I'm looking for some training wheels here. I want to be able to play optionally in harmony with the chord, but also have blue notes. If I can have both of those things at the same time, gravy. It's going to make it much easier for me to wrap my head around what I'm doing. Okay, since the minor and the major blues scale aren't being any help to us at all in finding out what scale we're going to play, we're going to revert back to key finder again, and I'm going to plug in these notes: F sharp, A, B, and E flat or D sharp. Again, I'm going to say I'm in the key of E, and would you believe it, the major scale is a perfect match. So the major scale contains all 4 notes of the chord and is supported in the key of E. So what does that look like? Here is E major. We've got a perfect match on the 4 notes of the B7 chord that we're trying to play. We've got this really fruity E flat. We're really going to kind of hammer on that because that's the idiosyncrasy of the major key. It's the only time during any one of these 3 chords that's being played underneath that we've got a major 7. And so when we're soloing over the top of B7, we want to get there. Now, neither the minor blues nor the major blues scale will give you access to that major 7, but as I hope you'll see shortly, it just sounds really, really good. So here we are, we've plumped on the major scale when we're playing over the top of B7. But the problem with the major scale is it doesn't have any of the 3 like magical flat notes. We're not playing a flat 3 or a flat 5 or a flat 7. And so it's not really, there's no way you can call the major scale a blues scale because it doesn't contain any flat notes. Let's throw one in. And this is completely arbitrary, just as a matter of choice. I chose to add the flat 3. So now we've got 3 completely independent scales that, depending upon which chord we're playing in the song, we're going to modulate between these 3 different scales. And something really interesting falls out of this approach. If you add all of those notes together, have a look at this chart. Nowhere is a flat 2 played and nowhere is a flat 6 played. But apart from those 2 exceptions, if we're playing these 3 scales here with some extra coloured notes, the flat 3s and the flat 5s, that's 10 of the 12 chromatic notes. Now you'll sometimes see this referred to as the full blues scale. It's a major scale with a flat 3, a flat 5 and a flat 7. And there are lots of blues theorists that say that that's the fundamental basis of everything that the blues is. The problem is that if somebody comes along and tells you you can play 10 notes out of the chromatic scale whenever you want, that's you're really struggling to make sense out of that statement. Because a lot of the time when you're playing one of those underlying chords, if you play too many dissonant notes, it's going to get worse and worse and more difficult to hear. And things are going to start going wrong. So I'm coming back to this concept of training wheels. I'm at pains to say that you can do anything you want whenever you want. Don't let me tell you you can't. But this is the set of rules that I've formulated to help me jam over the top of this stuff. And I think it sounds good. So what I'm going to do at this point is switch to live mode. I'll get rid of my green screen and all of this nonsense. I'll do some playing and then I'll be able to, during editing, I'll be able to paste different views of Guitar Tutor up to show you what notes I'm playing and how I'm trying to accentuate the difference between the 3 scales. Okay, things to watch for: G sharp when I'm in Mixolydian with the flat 3 rundown, major 3, flat 3. When I head to Dorian, really hit the minor 3rd hard, and when I'm in major, stress that D sharp or E flat. Let's see what we can do. There's so many buttons to press. So I stress again, this isn't the be-all and end-all rule set. I'm not saying that this is how you play the blues. I'm saying that this is one template that I can use to help to teach me which notes sound good where. And it certainly helps, you know, when I'm really picking out the notes of the chord tones underneath. What if you're playing double stops? What if you're playing 3 notes at a time? When do you go from being a rhythm player to a solo player? It's such a fluid discussion that I don't think it behooves anybody to say this is the only way that you can do it. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm saying, well, I've got this minor blues scale, that sounds awesome. The major blues scale, that sounds awesome. How does Peter Green do it? How does Jimmy Page do it? Okay, there's a bit of a talent ceiling there. But if I can't do that by intuition, if I can't, feel this in my body the way Jimi Hendrix did, I've got to use some sort of crutch or leg up to help me to understand what the theory is, get it under my fingers, and then that helps me to hear what sounds good from that theory. And I can say, oh, that sounded amazing when I went to the major scale, and every time I really kind of hammered out on that D sharp, it kind of pins the underlying B7, and you really hear the quality of that chord come through. The B7 can be the trickiest, I think. It's the trickiest part to get right if you're trying to use some standard generic template like the minor pentatonic with the flat 5. It struggles, I think, to play over the B7 without some helping notes. And this is just, one idea I've had to come up with, well, what might those helping notes be? Hope you found that useful. If you did, please hit the like button. I'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.